Hello, folks. Welcome, welcome. We'll just get everybody into the session. Nice to see you all. Hopefully, you're expecting to be at our Caldicott Guardians webinar. Everything you need to know about the role and principles of the Caldicott Guardian. So we'll just let people in and then we'll get going. While you are joining, please can I ask you to pop your name and organisation in the chat so our presenters have got a sense of who's on the call. And we're just giving it a minute. I can see somebody's raised a hand. We don't have the ability for participants to speak specifically. So either need to pop a message in the chat or in the Q&A chat, really. Q&A is for Q&A. Just while you're joining, you will have noticed that recording has been enabled. Oh, aren't you good? You're all putting your name and organisation in the chat. Excellent. Thank you. Yes, so recording has been enabled. We do have the copy of the slides that we're going to talk you through. All our presenters have sent through their slides. So the recording and the slides will be sent to everybody who's registered and it will be available on the website in a few days. Okay, I think our flow of attendees is slowing down. So I will get going. So welcome everybody. This is the first of 2 webinars about Caldicott Guardians. And the second one is in February, 20th of February, but it will be covering the same ground. So if you've got colleagues who you think would like to come along to a future session, do let them know. So my name's Liz Jones. I'm the Policy Director at the National Care Forum. We're a membership organisation for not-for-profit providers of care and support. And we're delighted to be working in partnership with the Digital Care Hub and the NHS Transformation Directorate to bring these 2 webinars to you. And just for a bit of background, we were talking about Caldicott Guardians amongst our members just before Christmas, and I was talking to the Digital Care Hub folks about how we might improve the knowledge across social care about Caldicott Guardians and the principles, the Caldicott principles that those guardians are, the guardian role is intended to uphold. And the Digital Care Hub folks said, oh yeah, actually we're really interested in something similar. So we've come together to bring this to you. So if I could have the next slide, please, Valeria. We have a little bit of housekeeping. It's not moving on for me. It is now. So as I said, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be publicly available. I'm afraid you're on mute and you can't be seen, but you can interact with us. So there's a Q&A function at the bottom. You'll see the little buttons. That's for your questions, and we will endeavour to answer them as we go. And we've got some time at the end to discuss some in more detail if we think they're a bit tricky. The chat function is really there for you to introduce yourselves. Let us know if you've got any issues, any technical problems, and we'll try and resolve them. Next slide, please. So we have got a great selection of people to talk to you about the Caldicott principles, what you need to think about when you're deciding how you're going to enact those Caldicott principles in your organisation. So what that might mean in terms of a role, whether you think that's something you would want to be doing in your organisation, or whether you want to seek some external support for it. So we've got Helen from the Caldicott Guardian Council, and I shall ask everybody to wave in a minute. And then we've got about half an hour to hear direct from the front line, so to speak. So we've got Fran, who has the Caldicott Guardian role at Essex Cares, and we've got Tanya, who will help with an outsourced solution if that is what people need. So I'm just going to ask all of our speakers to come on camera. So Helen, can you come on camera and say hello?
Hi everybody, well, hopefully you can see and hear me all right. I'm Helen Dyer, I'm a nurse by background and have been a Caldicott Guardian for the last 10 years.
Excellent. And she hasn't said she's on the Caldicott Guardian Council, and what we're describing today is a Caldicott ninja. So that's Helen. Fran, do you want to say hello to everybody?
Hi everyone, I'm Fran. I'm Head of Quality and Corporate Assurance at ACL, and I've been the Caldicott for the last 2 years.
Thank you. And Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya Palmariello Divini. I'm the director and founder of Data Privacy Simplified. I'm also a data protection officer, and we offer a outsourced Caldicott Guardian role. Barry Moult, who couldn't be here, is also very much a he's a Caldicott Guardian, but also a Caldicott Guardian Ninja. And we have been providing training to Caldicott Guardians, even in my full-time employment in the NHS, but also to health and care. So we've been the ones really supporting Caldicott Guardians in their roles, whether internally or as consultants.
Thank you. And everyone's saying hello to you in the chat. Okay, brilliant. So just if we move on to our next slide, just so we can remind you about the Digital Care Hub, who are the driving force behind these two webinars. You may know them as Digital Social Care. They've had a rebrand. So the Digital Social Care Hub is really about providing free expert support and resources and advice to the care sector in terms of the digital journey. So helping us move in the right direction with our digital transformation. We describe it as digital expertise from social care providers for social care providers with social care providers, and we are really delighted that they have agreed that this topic, Caldicott Guardian topic, is a really important one. So with no further ado, I am going to hand over to Helen. Helen's going to talk us through the principles of the Caldicott world, what we need to know, and how we might make it work. So Helen's got about half an hour. Over to you.
Okay, thank you ever so much for that, Liz. Oh, what to say in half an hour? This was really difficult. As I say, I've been a Caldicott Guardian for 10 years. And I still feel like a beginner. There is so much to learn. Every day is a learning day as a Caldicott Guardian. You always come across new scenarios, new problems, new questions that you're asked to give advice on. It's a fascinating job and one that I love. And I think having some enthusiasm for the role is probably one of the first pointers for who to appoint. If you have somebody that's enthusiastic, then you're halfway there. So next slide, please. So just what is this mystical thing, a Caldicott Guardian? My first boss called me his Caldicott cardigan because I gave him an extra layer of warmth and comfort in the winter. And I've also heard it described as Caldicott gardening because you're nurturing confidentiality in the organisation. But basically it's a senior person, and it really does need to be somebody senior who has that wisdom from lived experience and understanding of what happens in the organisation within a health and care organisation, who makes sure that the personal information about those whose services is used legally, ethically and appropriately. Sometimes the word appropriately is interchanged with wisely, and that confidentiality is maintained. So the Caldicott Guardian always has a good understanding of the common law duty of confidentiality, and that's probably their primary trade in stock, their baseline understanding. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So through these next 20 or so minutes, I hope to give you a glimpse of these, where Caldicott Guardians came from, who needs them, the Caldicott principles that we uphold, the ethical framework and trustworthiness, which is very important in our daily activities, what Caldicott Guardians might do, especially if they're new in role, some examples of questions that Caldicott Guardians might face, where they can get support from, and where to find out more. Next slide, please. So this lady here was Dame Fiona Caldicott, and I remember hearing her once say she didn't quite understand why 22,000 people in the country carried her husband's name. But back in 1997, she published a report on the review of patient identifiable information, and she'd been asked by the government to do this because this thing called information technology was making sharing information so easy that there were concerns coming about whether we could continue to trust our doctors. For example, if you go to your doctor, you expect to be able to tell them your deepest, darkest secrets, and if you don't feel safe doing that, then how can they possibly treat you? I've put a picture of the UK there to remind us that it's a UK-wide role. Oh, I didn't carry on and finish saying, sorry. And it was in this report in 97 that the suggestion was that there would be 6 Caldicott principles and this new role called a Caldicott Guardian. So the picture of the UK is there to remind us that it's across the UK in some form or another. There's a gentleman there holding a plethora of documents. There are over 30 different statutes and law that are relevant in this field. There is no way that your Caldicott Guardian is going to be expert in all of them, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later on, but they will have a broad understanding. And then the final picture on the right is of a bottle of whiskey. And a good bottle of Scotch malt whiskey matures nicely over time. And that's what Caldicott's done. It's really come on so that we now have 8 Caldicott principles. It's no longer just health as it was when it first came. It's grown and grown. And in fact, in 21, with the new guidance that came out from the National Data Guardian's Office, that was as a result of public consultation that we should have Caldicott Guardians in all publicly funded health and social care services. Next slide, please. So this is the National Data Guardian. Dame Fiona was the first, and she was in the role from 2014. And then in 2018, the National Data Guardian Act was passed, which makes it a statutory role. And the reason that I mention that is because any advice or guidance that comes from the National Data Guardian's Office has to be given due regard, which means if you're not going to follow it, you need to document your decision not to follow it and how you've come to that decision. And the guidance is out there that if you are providing publicly funded care, you should have a Caldicott Guardian in role. So this is Dr. Nicola Byrne, the current National Data Guardian. She works with a panel of independent experts. The role's sponsored by the Department of Health and Social Care, but it's independent, and it's an independent champion for patients and the public. She's not a regulator like the Information Commissioner, but she does work very closely with the Information Commissioner. And as well as having a panel of experts, she has some subgroups, one of which is the United Kingdom Caldicott Guardian Council, which I'm lucky enough to be a member of. Next slide, please. So this is the guidance that I mentioned, and you will find it on the National Data Guardian's website. It was published in 21, and the whole of the document is a result of public consultation. This is about building the trust of the public. And if we think about what we want from Caldicott Guardians in their role in organisations, it's to build that level of trust, to add value to our organisations and to the people that we are looking after. Next slide, please. I've just put the index page on a slide here, just to give you a feel of what's in the document. It is an easy read. It's fairly straightforward. But having said that, the UK CGC have also put together a FAQ page. So if there's anything that you want to find out any more about the guidance, it's in the FAQ page for the CGC. And just looking through there, the history of the role, I've just given you a potted history. Should you appoint one, what the roles and responsibilities of the Caldicott Guardian are, the relationship to other key roles in the organisation, who this person should be accountable to, their competencies and knowledge a Caldicott Guardian needs. And I always say that one of the most important thing that Caldicott Guardian needs is to be brave, because often the Caldicott Guardian can be the lone voice, the person that's shouting Emperor's New Clothes, the person that's saying no when everybody else is saying yes. So it needs those leadership skills and interpersonal skills to be able to deliver those messages sensitively. And how organisations should involve and support their Caldicott Guardian. So as you can see, it's a really useful tool to use. Next slide, please. So I've said about the FAQs, this is the UK CGC website. And again, the UK CGC is not a regulator. And although they are contactable, if a member of the public were to contact them, they would deflect or signpost back to their local Caldicott Guardian. The UK CGC is there simply to support Caldicott Guardians in their roles, and organisations that have them, of course. Next slide, please. And this is the sort of practical support and resource that's available from them. They've got guidance material. It was originally published in writing, but it's been renewed and refreshed on a regular basis. It's known as the manual, Caldicott Guardian Manual. There's an advice request service, virtual training workshops. I'll let you read it yourself. But I would draw your attention to a checklist for new Caldicott Guardians. Things like making sure that the Caldicott Guardian is known about. If you've got a switchboard, for example, it's quite good fun to do some mystery shopping and ring organisations and say, could you put me through to your Caldicott Guardian, please? You'd be amazed how many times the response is, our what? So next slide, please. So this is the contact form that's on the website, and I've brought this up for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there's a general contact form, this one, but if you see on the left, there's also a request advice form. So if your Caldicott Guardian has a difficult problem that they're struggling with, they can drop a line, an email through, and that will be acknowledged within 3 working days. And there's usually a full response within 20 days. So it's not an instant response, but it's rare that a Caldicott issue has to be answered the same day. Usually you've got some good thinking time that you can spend. Also at the bottom, sign up to our mailing list. You don't get junk email as a result. All you will get is perhaps 3-4 times a year a Caldicott Guardian newsletter that gives you the events that are coming on. So don't be worried about signing up to that. You're not going to get a load of junk. Next slide, please. So we're currently running evening classes. This is the timetable for this year. And these are some of the practical things. So record keeping. A Caldicott Guardian needs to keep records of all the advice that they give and how they've come to formulate that advice based on the question that they've been asked. A legal framework. I've mentioned before how much law is involved in this field, and some people have the false impression that one law will trump another. It doesn't. You've got to tiptoe your way around all of them, and often statute can be permissive, and people think that, oh, because we can do something, we should do something. That's not always the case. And that's where the ethical element comes in. So the legal framework's important to understand. Problem-solving approach. So Caldicott Guardian needs to be able to analyse questions that are put in front of them, and instead of just giving a gut reaction response or a response based on previous experience, actually be able to analyse it fully using all the Caldicott principles. Data protection impact assessments. Whilst we wouldn't expect Caldicott Guardians to be signing them off, we would be expecting them to offer advice on each of them. So whenever you're considering new projects or processes. Safeguarding. Caldicott Guardians have a very clear role in that and supporting how information is shared. Maintaining confidentiality after death. So, of course, although UK GDPR and the Data Protection Act doesn't apply after death, the common law duty of confidentiality is still in place. So it's important to understand that. And then finally, information sharing with the police. It's very uncomfortable when somebody in a uniform comes and demands information from you to say no if you don't think it's appropriate to share. So that session will be about that. Okay, moving on. Next slide. There's also a breakfast club once a month that the Caldicott Guardian can come and bring any news, achievements or questions. And the breakfast club's got nearly 200 members. There's usually about 20 on the call. And it's just an hour, 8 till 9 in the morning, very informal. And people can come and chat about their challenges. Next slide, please. There is some free learning modules through e-learning for Health, Health Education England and Open Athens. These were written by the council, or the subject matter came from the council. Health Education England people were much better at putting the slides together than we were. So there's 3 modules. One is aimed at all staff about what the role of the Caldicott Guardian is. The middle one is for Caldicott Guardians. And the bottom one is for the senior leadership team to understand how to interact with the Caldicott Guardian to get the best out of the role for their organisation. Next slide, please. We also have an online network for Caldicott Guardians. And if you would like access to the online network, drop an email to the Secretariat at the UK CGC. It's a digital health network forum and is extremely useful for getting in touch and building your network. I always say that Caldicott Guardians develop their own little specialisms. So, for example, the skills of an acute trust Caldicott Guardian with a very busy A&E that might have gun and knife crime. If you don't come across gun and knife crime every day, you don't quite know how to handle the information. But occasionally it might happen that you need to. And so to have a good network of fellow Caldicott Guardians to be able to contact and understand their expertise is extremely useful. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Caldicott principles. I mentioned that they were initiated in 97 with the 6. In 2013, Dame Fiona wrote or led on a second document. If you remember, 97 was followed by 98 and the Data Protection Act coming in, or GDPR coming in for the first time. And everybody locked down their information. Everybody was frightened of being sued if they shared too much information. And so Dame Fiona wrote information to share or not to share. And this is when we got Caldicott principle number 7, which says it can be as important to share information as to not share, especially for direct care. And it also defined boundaries of what direct care was about. So I guess it's what it says on the tin. What it isn't is it isn't information for research or management purposes, for example. And then in 2020, Principle 8 was established, and this is all about we call it the no surprise principle. So people should know and understand what we are doing with their information. Next slide, please. This is a very busy slide, but I find it a useful framework. I first saw it last year from my colleague at Council, Arjun Dillon, and it embeds the 8 Caldicott principles along with the theory for trust. And if you're going to trust something, it's purported that you have to have logic, authenticity, and empathy. It's also embedded with our ethical framework, and we talk about the Caldicott Guardian role being ethical and putting ethics into the decision making. And here, the ethical model that is used is the medical model for autonomy, beneficence, non-malevolence, and distributive justice. And so we apply these to our decision making, all 3 elements. So, for example, I might do a final check on a decision about advice that I'm going to offer and say, what is this advice that I'm going to offer do for people's trust in the organisation and how we're using the information? Next slide, please. I mentioned complying with the law earlier and the huge amount of legal framework that is in place. And I really struggled with this when I was a new Caldicott Guardian. So I would always recommend that your Caldicott Guardian has access to some legal advice wherever possible. The key that I found, which was why I've put a key in the picture, is that there are 3 frameworks that apply wherever you work as a Caldicott Guardian. The first being the Data Protection Act, GDPR, common law duty of confidentiality, and the other one being contract law. So, for example, you will contract with cleaners perhaps or other people to provide services, and what is in those contracts for, from a Caldicott perspective, to protect your service users' information. And then there's a whole plethora of subject-specific laws that are all overarched or underpinned by the Human Rights Act. And it'll depend which particular field you're working in as to which laws apply for your organisation most commonly. So I would always recommend that your Caldicott Guardian sits down and has a think about which laws they need to be more familiar with as part of their gap analysis when they're first in role. Next slide, please. I've just listed a few activities that are Caldicott Guardian, and these are the ones that are identified on the council website and in the guidance. I think I've probably mentioned them already, most of them. So if we move straight on to the next slide.
Helen, I'm just looking at some questions in the chat, I just think, could you just go back one slide, Valeria? I just think people kind of trying to just understand exactly about the role and whether and when they have to have one. And I think some of the things you've said you've got on this slide might benefit from just talking through a little bit more.
Okay. When you say when they have to have one, sorry, I've not been keeping an eye on the chat.
No. So do all care providers need a Caldicott Guardian? I haven't understood clearly when you need to have a Caldicott Guardian. Those are the 2 questions I'm looking at. So if you are providing publicly funded care, then yes, you should have a Caldicott Guardian. And I use the word should rather than must, because if you decide not to, then you need to document that decision and its rationale. It needs to be a senior level decision, because if something goes pear-shaped further on down the line, you will be challenged about why you haven't got one. Thank you.
So hopefully that
very
helps.
clear. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on this slide? Does that answer the questions, Liz?
I think so. I think it's that point really about the disclosures of confidential information. And I think some of your case studies will really help us. So let's move on.
Okay. So if we move on to the next slide then. So this is one that's come up quite recently. This was actually a mental health provider seeing a patient at home, 95-year-old, and there were some pots of cannabis plants on the windows. And the carer came back and said, "Oh, we need to report her to the police." Well, the law is permissive. It allows you to report to the police if you think it's about public benefit. What is the benefit of reporting to the police in this scenario? You would need to do a full analysis based on far more information than you've got on this page before you made that decision whether or not to go to the police. There might be elements of safeguarding involved here. All sorts of different things could come into play, and it would be based around the actual family situation that's there. So I love it that she's so proud of her grandson because he's turning into an entrepreneur and his friends are buying these cannabis plants. Do you tell her? Do you report this to the police? Again, it's an ethical discussion with the rest of the team to figure out what's the right thing to do. And the Caldicott Guardian needs to understand their own ethics and internal ethics before, and be aware of those at the same time as analysing this particular question using that problem-solving approach that I mentioned earlier. So next slide, please. There's another 4 scenarios on this slide. Lasting power of attorney. How much information should you be sharing with the lasting power of attorney? And in this particular case, the OPG, Office of the Public Guardian, has highlighted some possible safeguarding concerns. So how much information should you share then? And again, you never have all the information that you need the first time you're asked a question. You have to go back and ask more. So what's the safeguarding concerns? Is it the same member of the family? So all sorts of bits there. We're buying a new record system from a company. It's an accredited supplier. Can we automatically assume it's trustworthy? So I'd straight away, I'd say, well, have you got a DPIA for it? Can I have a look at the DPIA? And then work it from there because you'll get far more information. The ambulance service is auditing admissions that they've prevented and have asked for information. Should you share it with them? Again, it needs full analysis of what information they're asking. And it might be that you can, once you've worked through the Caldicott principles, you can share everything but the details of the patient themselves. So they don't perhaps need to know the name, address, age, anything that's identifiable, but you could share aggregated or anonymised data and have the same effect. And in relation to incidents, for example, with where there's been an incident and a member of staff has reported it using an incident form, should you share that incident form with the police if they're asking? And again, it depends on the individual circumstance. We always say it's context, context, context. And just because you've done something once for one service user, you shouldn't necessarily do it again for a different service user. Next slide, please. I just wanted to highlight this checklist. If you have a Caldicott Guardian, do get them on the Caldicott Guardian register. It is a public-facing role, so they should be contactable. And the checklist will give them something to work through once new in post. And it's also worth revisiting. I revisit my checklist for the organisations I support on an annual basis, and also build it into appraisal and an annual plan for Caldicott Guardian. Next slide, please. And again, just to return back to this the Caldicott Guardians are a powerful force for good. They really can add value to your organisation if you harness them, demonstrating that your organisation's trustworthy in the way that you handle your service user information. And I think next slide. Oh, that's the questions slide. Do pop them in the chat and we'll come to questions at the end. And next slide.
I've got a burning question though, Helen. What happened with the 95-year-old lady and her cannabis plants? We all need to know.
It did go to safeguarding. They didn't report her direct to the police, but it did go to safeguarding because there was some concern about whether there was too much handling in the home for her, and she wasn't told. There was felt to be no benefit to telling her. Bless her. I wonder
if she was growing them for herself. Oh dear. Anyway, thank you. That solved that one. There is a question that I probably think we should take now, which I think, so it says in the chat, if there is an HR and employment law, I think that means lawyer. If someone's got an HR and employment lawyer employed by the care provider, do you still need to have a Caldicott Guardian in place?
It's a completely different role.
Yeah. And your point about if you're delivering any degree of publicly funded care, you should have one, I think, is probably the highlight takeaway for people.
Even if it's just one patient that's funded by CHC, for example, or
yes,
local authority.
Yes, of course, NHS and local authority funding.
Yeah.
And given that can flex, but you could, speedily find yourself in that situation where you may not have had somebody and then you do have somebody, you need to be on top of it all the time.
What I didn't say is how you organise the Caldicott Guardian function in your organisation can be your own design. It can be that you've got a Caldicott Guardian and a deputy, and I would always recommend having a deputy as well if you can possibly manage it internally. It might be that you join up with a group of other organisations and share one. The important thing being that they understand the use of data within your organisation for your patient service group. Or it might be that you choose to outsource, and I know we'll hear more from Tanya later on about the pros and cons of outsourcing.
We will.
I personally act as an outsource for several
And I think that point about how we organise ourselves is quite important, actually. So that sharing
it's what works
idea
for you. Yeah, after you've put it in place, I'd recommend reviewing it on a frequent basis until you're happy that it really is adding benefit to your organisation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Helen. Right, you're still with us, aren't you? We're going to hear from Fran and then we're going to hear from Tanya and then we'll pick up any outstanding questions. Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you. Right, Fran, you're next, bringing it to life in a provider organisation.
Yes.
Great. Off you go.
Like Chris Whitty. Next slide. Always wanted to do that. And next slide again. So what I'm here to talk to you about is some in practice kind of examples. So just to tell you a little bit about me is, I've worked in kind of adult social care, both for a local authority and now a local authority trading company since I was 16, predominantly around adult social care. I've been here for 10 years. I did actually come over as the information governance manager, so you could probably guess I got a little bit of an interest in it. But actually, I really enjoyed the bit around both information governance, but also quality of care, because it's so interlinked, data and how we provide care. And currently, I am the Caldicott Guardian and Data Protection Officer. So we talked about structure. I would say we're a roughly medium-sized business across areas. And it works well, and I've got a balance of people I can kind of bounce off if I feel there's a conflict between my two roles. I'm also the nominated individual for CQC. So hopefully some of the things I'm going to talk to you about over the next few slides will resonate with some of you. So I'm passionate about doing things right and finding a way to do things right. But I think Helen mentioned it in her slides. You've got to be brave. And when I was putting these slides together, I was like, oh, fear the fear and do it anyway. which is absolutely right, because sometimes you're the only person in that organisation, and you're like, you're having a battle sometimes, but you're still battling because you know it's right, and having that conversation and being that conscious of the organisation. So just a little bit about me. Next slide. So I've got the next 3 slides are just kind of reflecting on some of the times it kind of cross-roll, DPO and Caldicott, obviously reflection on the Caldicott, and around actual elements that have happened and things we've considered here at ECL. So one that may be applicable to a lot of you, or you may be on your journey towards it, is obviously electronic care records. And as part of that, you know, you'll be doing your data protection impact assessment, you'll be doing all your elements around, you know, your technical security, but also taking the lens to the Caldicott principles is really key. And DPA and Caldicott, they do blend, but sometimes there's a little bit different lens to it. So just to give a flavour of some of the things, when you're looking at the principles, justify, you know, you're talking to people, you're defining, you're understanding, you're collaborating, you're trying to understand why do you need, you know, to collect information, use that, process that information, where the flow is going to go. When you look at kind of, and I link these two together around only using the necessary and minimum information, when you're building those forms, you know, I remember having lots of conversations with staff across the business around, you know, they wanted that field. I was like, well, why do you want that field? We've always had that field. I said, have we ever used that field? No. So why are we collecting it? We shouldn't have more information than we need. It needs to be useful. Absolutely. Don't skimp on what's asking that could have an impact on somebody's care. But, you know, when is it appropriate? Need to know, obviously, access control. You know, we have lots of different departments doing different things across the organisation. And I can remember getting into quite a battle over, okay, we're all one company. Yes, okay, we're all one company. We've all got confidentiality agreements, but why should that person have access to that person's data just because we're in one company? You know, it builds that risk level up. And looking at, you know, when is it right to have the appropriate levels? And again, even down to a form and section level, kind of looking at who has access to what data. It's the same as if you're in an office with paper records and who's got the keys to the cabinet, as it were. Awareness of responsibility is really important, you know, that across your teams, your organisations, your homes, your services, that your staff are aware of their responsibilities. So, you know, with anything that you're doing, it's a good opportunity to remind people around, you know, using the data in a confidential manner. And, you know, making sure that if you need to get some additional training, so for example, we were looking at exploring using some consent data to do some marketing, and it wasn't just a case of going, oh, well, you know, now can you tick this box that says consent, make sure you talk to the person. We made sure we took the time to speak to individuals around, you know, why it is and understanding it. How many times do you go into a shop and you go, do you want an email receipt? And then you get 1,500 emails. You know, you've really got to, you know, they don't understand. They've been told, get emails. So making sure your staff understand how they're using their information and their responsibilities within it is really important. Comply with the law kind of says it all, and obviously your DPA will take that through you in terms of your legal bases and any other considerations that you may need to take. Share and protect, Principle 7. I was really fortunate when this came out. I was working at local authority at the time, and we had a session up in London, and I actually met Dame Fiona Caldicott. And it was like one of the big kind of game changers almost in that bit is like, finally somebody's saying, you know, do share. You think how many times, even now, you know, I could think of probably one every week where somebody will phone me up and go, the GP's not talking to me. And I'm like, but why not? This is direct care. This is, you know, benefiting that individual's life. You know, where is the barriers? We still, you know, several, you know, 10 years, no, 10 years down the line, kind of away from it. But obviously for our purposes in terms of the new system, you know, we worked on with our commissioners because we wanted some share reporting and what was appropriate, what wasn't, who was going to have it in each of the organisations. And again, you know, inform people. Privacy notices obviously came in, you know, fair processing notices as they were, you know, making sure it's proportionate, that, you know, you've got your full ones probably on your website, but how often does Mrs. Miggins, who's 80-year-old, likes her TV, and there is this whizzy thing called the internet going to go looking at it? So actually making sure that there is something. So in our customer leaflet, we make sure that there's a section on there. It's high level, it's simple, it's plain language. If you want more, contact us. So just so you can kind of make it aware and thinking about that. So that's a little bit around the considerations with new digital systems. Next slide. Again, touching on something that, you know, Helen mentioned in her presentation, obviously deceased requests. So being in social care, a little bit different from the NHS organisations. We will often get requests from individual relatives requesting the care records held for one of our customers after they've passed away. Data Protection Act doesn't apply, it only applies to living individuals. Freedom of information, probably likely to be exempt under confidential information. Obviously, you've been looking at it, right? Access to health records doesn't apply. And I did bracket it in most circumstances because we are increasingly seeing more medical professionals coming into social care. But common law confidentiality, it extends after death. And these are probably the ones where, you know, you need to reflect and think about the whole circumstance. Absolutely, as Helen said, every case is done on an individual basis. It's involved speaking with the services. What do we know, you know, when a customer is alive? You know, what relationship do they have? Who's asking for it? Why do they want it? You know, have we had any conversations previously on information sharing? And then if we did decide to provide something, again, you know, we're only sharing what we feel is, you know, kind of that minimum necessary information. So probably one in social care that you'd come across a lot. So I was trying to draw away from, normally when you think about the usual example is sharing with the police, you know, if somebody's had a stabbing. Thankfully, it doesn't happen very often at all. Next slide, and the last one for me. So I put in an example of actually where I've said no is basically the outcome of this. So we had a request to share information with a third party who was working for an NHS trust as part of a review of their intermediate care. They wanted to analyse demand across the system, and obviously being a reablement provider, we kind of sat in the middle of it. And they wanted lots of data, kind of 4-year period, loads of care records, dates, etc., etc., etc. And it was one of those dilemmas straight from the word go. Your gut says something's not right. It doesn't feel right. So, you know, again, as Helen said, if you're making a decision on whether to or whether not, recording in line with anything in social care, if you didn't record it, it didn't happen, is just as important. And obviously this is one slide. There was actually a 14-page document that I did as I went through my thought process, considering each element. What did we tell our customers? You know, had we told them anything from privacy notices? You know, what about the security? If we did share, is there appropriate security? Is it reasonable? Is it proportionate? Lawful bases? In the end, the outcome was, you know, as a Caldicott Guardian and as the DPO and conversations with our directors, is that we didn't share it. We offered anonymised, but obviously that wasn't appropriate. But it doesn't necessarily mean, going right back to the slide, doesn't mean that necessarily if you can't, there isn't a way. So as where our relationship, we felt it was inappropriate and disproportionate. We do share a level of information, obviously, with our commissioners of the service, and they had different elements where they could draw on outside of us. So there was an element of us. So, like I say, it's not always a hard no, but kind of a way that's appropriate, lawful, and ethical. So that's just a couple of examples from us in care. Hopefully that's been useful for you.
Thank you, Fran. That's fascinating, particularly thinking about the challenge of digital systems. Just a quick question before we go on to Tanya. The requests after death, what were people asking for? Requests for information after death? And
it
why?
could be anything. So a lot of the times is they're trying to understand. They're going through a period of grief. And they're trying to understand what's happened, or they feel that, you know, that there's questions answered, unanswered. And we had one that was, they heard that we had some photographs and there'd been some damage to the property and they'd lost a lot of their photographs of their relative. So it could be anything. So we even deceased staff requests. We unfortunately are dealing with one at the moment. So yeah,
Okay.
wide and varied.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. Very insightful. Thank you. Right, you can you hang on to our panel discussion as well,
Yep.
Fran? Yeah,
Yep.
brilliant. Okay. Thanks, Fran, for just bringing some of that real kind of practical examples, how it works, what you have to grapple with. Very helpful. So Tanya, another way of looking at things with
Yes.
an outsourced solution on these dilemmas.
Yes.
Thank
So I'm
you.
Tanya Palmariello Divini, and we offer a lot of outsourced services, and one of them is Caldicott Guardian. And Barry Moult, who is a business partner of mine, he's actually a Caldicott Guardian that offers that service. And within our company, my Chief Information Security Officer is also a Caldicott Guardian. Both of them have a background in nursing, so that's why we kind of packed it up in that way. And I'm providing the data protection officer services as well. And when I was internal in the NHS, long background in the NHS, the Caldicott Guardian and myself, we were best friends basically always. I needed them, they needed me, as we worked together on things. And I was in an information governance role in the beginning. Data protection was a part of it, but it was the whole kind of series. And we would get all sorts of queries. And even with for access to Health Records Act, which does apply to us in the NHS for the deceased, there were family disputes, it was these sort of things. And then it's like, okay, are they the executor of the will? And there was fighting between the family, still goes on today. And what is proportionate? What even if that person has died, what is in the records? Does it say they wouldn't want something disclosing? So there's a lot of things. So I think everything that was said by Helen and Fran definitely resonates. And I'm quite excited to be here as well. And hopefully I can give a bit of a different model perspective, because obviously care homes are sometimes smaller and might not have someone that can execute that role. Next slide. I wanted to say that as well, Fran. I like saying it. So Caldicott Guardian in care, because we have heard of the history, how it came about in the NHS. It's a really, really already built-in role. But I have to say, I also work with a lot of private providers, not just care homes, but private providers who deliver health care for the NHS, and they also struggle with that concept of a Caldicott Guardian as well. So it's kind of similar. So the NHS is kind of used to it. They had to have that forever, and that doesn't mean that Caldicott Guardian in the NHS know everything and don't need training. That doesn't mean that at all. But I think for care homes particularly, it's kind of a new thing, and to decide, as Helen said, whether they are going to do that or whether they are going to document an exemption, it is down to them. But for me, as a, if I had someone in a care home, I would want that champion of confidentiality, for someone to speak for those residents. Next slide, please. So again, this is just a reiteration. It applies to all public bodies, but also if you provide the services you're commissioned, whether by local authorities or by the integrated care boards, or by whatever organization that commissioned you that is a public body to deliver that service, you should have one in place. I'm not going to go over that again. It has been answered. So next slide. Okay, so why Caldicott Guardians play a crucial role in safeguarding the privacy and confidentiality of residents. You have heard it from Helen, and also real life experience from Fran. They are going to be the champion, the ethical way, in terms of like, yeah, we can do this. Data Protection Act says you're allowed to do this. It's okay-ish, but is it ethical? Is it something that should be done? Is it something that they expect you to do? Would it be a surprise? So a lot of the data protection principles and the Caldicott Guardian principles go really hand in hand, but the Caldicott Guardian principles put a very ethical and moral spin on it. As Data Protection Act, it's very legal, so it's kind of very legal there. So for me, it is very important, and I would suggest that care homes to have one, however they execute it, whether in-house, train someone up that is suitable for that role, or outsource it if you want to pool together. I know it's all budget and money, but it is about the confidentiality piece. And I don't know how it's otherwise championed in your organization. If you have no one, we heard before you have a lawyer in employment law, I'm not sure how much they're going to champion data protection and confidentiality. So it isn't one size fits all, definitely not. It's about thinking, right, this is kind of our staff that we have. This is our residents. That's the data. What do we do day to day? And does the data that we have deserve respect and confidentiality? And do we need someone that champions that? Hence Caldicott Guardian. So I think when a Caldicott Guardian role comes in, I think it's not about them doing all the admin and all of this. No, for me, it's more right, you must do this, listening, so the staff listening to someone who's professional and understands the role of someone caring for someone, but also can make them understand how they can maintain confidentiality and still do their job, because you can do that. And I think that's where the Caldicott Guardian role is really, really important to champion that. Also, information sharing protocols. Fran's example, when what we call secondary purpose. So you have a purpose why you receive the data from residents. If then someone comes and asks you for that, which might be a really good project, it might be something, oh, we want this information so we can see if we need more care homes or more specialist care homes. Great, but that's not why the residents have given it to you. It's a secondary purpose. So again, you might have a data protection officer advising you on the UK GDPR, but you also need the common law of confidentiality and the Caldicott Guardian advice and check with each other. And the information sharing protocols, sometimes if you are now more and more get together with integrated care systems, don't know whether you heard about them, but this is where in a region, the systems work together, the hospitals, the care homes, charities, private companies, everyone working together around the care. So it's not just GPs and the care home, but other community services. And then I did a very specific training once for one of these integrated care systems, because the Caldicott Guardians were really at loss, because they were like, why do we get asked all these questions and when can we share? So I asked them, what worries you? And they said patient complaints. And I was like, okay, so let's talk about it. Why would they complain? Well, if we share with the care home, so if the GP, so if we share with the care home, what if then a relative says, why did you share this? Because that's a lot of relatives might be involved in the care and they might complain. And I said, okay, so you're worried about the complaint, but if we document the reason why we shared, and it was for direct care, whether it's in an emergency, then it's under safeguarding, or it's direct care, then yes, they can complain, but you have a documentation to prove why you made that decision. So this is where I very much also like Principle 7, because as an information governance manager, I was always told I'm a barrier for sharing. And I was like, I'm not. I'm just where it is appropriate to share. The Caldicott Guardian definitely has the best understanding to make that decision, or a medical professional. But where you shouldn't share, like the example from Fran, because it's not an emergency, it's not safeguarding, it's not direct care, that's where, let's step back and assess. It's not about being a barrier, it's about doing the right thing, the ethical thing, and no surprises, Principle 8, which I also love. Because how many times do you ask when you get something through from a GP or so on, or when you see something happening national, and you think, oh, that's what they do with my data? Are you surprised? If you are surprised, we didn't do a good job, did we? Well, so it is hard, because I also provide contractual services to NHS England and the team that releases national data sets, and we do so much work. But we still, because I'm also DPO for some GPs, patients complain and said, I didn't agree to give the data. And it's like, yeah, but you also didn't opt out. And then the patient says, well, I didn't know I had to. And I understand that, because as Fran said, it's not just the elderly population, but they don't generally listen when we send them posters through the post 5 years ago to say, oh, the national opt-out. They don't understand it. So you will have to deal with complaints, but that's not the problem. The good thing is you have a lot of guidance, UK Caldicott Guardian Council, documentation. So go on that evening class. I like the evening class. Document. And I think that's the brilliant thing. You need to document it. And then, yes, you might be worried, but it's about being able to say, yeah, there might be complaints, but I had a justified reason. And, you know, and after my training, I asked the Caldicott Guardians, I said, you know what, my confidence is much higher now, because they always felt they were doing the wrong thing. And it's an isolating role if you're in a small organization. So GP practice, they have to have Caldicott Guardians, and it's a very isolating role. But, you know, that's why the networking is important. Can I have next slide? I tried to do it myself. I forgot that I can't do it. I'm not going to go through the principles because you already had them from Helen, but, you know, it is a complex landscape. And that's why I think that there's no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in having the networking, and there's no shame in asking for training. So if you nominate someone, make sure they get the appropriate resources to become one. You can learn, and as Helen said, you can age like a good old mulled whiskey and mature.
I like your final line there, Tanya. Think of the Caldicott Guardian as the conscience of the organisation and the person to make decisions in relation to confidential data.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
think if we just put that everywhere, we would have achieved our mission.
Yes.
Perhaps we need to pop that in lots of places, Katie. Thank you.
I absolutely, and I think that's what we need to enhance the trust of patients. We can't just think someone, you know, dignity as well. So if you're somewhere and there's an elderly person, maybe they have dementia and so on, that doesn't mean that they don't have choices. That doesn't mean they don't have right to confidentiality. They definitely have the right to confidentiality and dignity. It's just how then you deal with it. And it's not a hard and fast rule. You need to decide it with your team how you're going to deal with it, and the Caldicott Guardian will help. Next slide. Information requests. Now, why did I bring that up? Because this is the one where a lot of laws come in. So it's not just some of these laws, a lot of laws comes in, as Fran said as well. And if I can just bring you on to the next slide, and I'll tell you why I brought this example up. Seek Caldicott Guardian advice. So what happens is they come to me as a data protection officer, and I talk them through the process, and I talk them through what can be released. But then there's something odd in the records, and I'm like, ooh, we now need to go to the Caldicott Guardian. So the Caldicott Guardian is in the heart of this process, right? Some are simple, might not need the Caldicott Guardian, but where it is, you know, it's like, okay, this is borderline. I need the Caldicott Guardian now to really look at this confidentiality. It's not longer about data protection. This is about confidentiality. So I can make decisions about the law. You know, we look at a lot of complex cases, but most of the times when, you know, we provide these advice on information requests, whether it's from the police, whether it's from fraud units and so on, I will bring the Caldicott Guardian in as the conscience of maintaining patient confidentiality. So it's, you know, law is here, and the ethical and moral and the trust. So there was a really good paper once produced by the NHS England, what now is the Transformation Directorate, at that time was called the Information Governance Alliance. And it was like, when is actually a crime that high that it is in the public interest versus not? And they had really good examples of when someone stole an apple or someone committed murder. Would you really breach patient confidentiality for a stolen apple? They didn't say stolen apple, but it was something very minor. And then obviously murder, you know, again, it's with the Caldicott Guardian that those decisions are reached. Next question, next slide. Third-party redaction. Again, I get a lot of questions on it, and you know, it's about, right, I need the Caldicott Guardian in the room with me because we need to go through the record. We need to look at, would they have would they have something vicious in these records that they wouldn't want to disclose? And if you think about some of your residents, they might not have capacity. So you have the Mental Health Capacity Act. Again, I go to the Caldicott Guardian. The Caldicott Guardian is my best friend. And the Caldicott Guardians I deal with, they always tell me that I'm their best friends. We support each other and we make the decisions. Fran is obviously her own best friend because she does both. But this is how we work. And I think it's important to realize when you appoint a Caldicott Guardian, if they're new, please look after them, give them the right resources and access. You have a beautiful UK Caldicott Guardian body, lots and lots of resources. Make sure they know about it. And there's lots of events for Caldicott Guardians. So please ensure that you have the confidentiality duty of confidence, you know, and if you think about, right, if I breach someone's confidence, will they tell me everything? And if not, is that going to impact their care? We also get a lot of, can we share with carers? Well, if you don't share this, if someone is released for a weekend away with their carers, with relatives, and you didn't give them important information, that might harm that patient. So yes, you can share, document, put processes in place, put a bit of a checklist. Each case is different, but you can talk with your team when it's actually for a direct care purpose, even if this person is not a health professional, but you're giving this resident to this person in their care. They need to know how to deal with them because they're going to care for them. So it's not about, oh, we can't share anything. It's about, let's sit down as a team. Let's look at appropriateness. Let's look at harm, safeguarding, mental health capacity, bring our Caldicott Guardian in. Next slide. Okay, so a bit about in-house Caldicott Guardian and outsourced. No model is better than the other. Also, if you can afford an in-house one, I do think it's better, because I think that you then have access to them 24/7, they get to know them better. But also an outsourced one, if you're a smaller organization, will give you a lot of benefits. They already have dealt with it, so it's not someone new that might be is going to be a bit scared and worried. Someone that has done that, they have the experience, they have come across a lot of scenarios. And that's why it's also a cost consideration. If the Caldicott Guardian, for a larger organization, you obviously will have someone probably full-time. And most of the organizations, they're actually a medical director and a Caldicott Guardian, so it's not a full-time role for them. They have to do a lot more than just being a Caldicott Guardian. But it really depends of who you are. Are you a big organization? Are you small? Can you collectively come together with a lot of smaller care homes and outsource one, or buy one in-house for one and then contribute to the cost? So there's so many models. The most important bit is assess the benefit and what you need out of a Caldicott Guardian. If you bring someone in, or you appoint someone in-house that is already an existing person, they have no skills and expertise, make sure you really look after them, put them in touch with the UK Caldicott Guardian Council, or even with other people. In data protection and information governance, we have a forum where we network, and you have that with the Caldicott Guardian Council. And that's the best thing you could do, because it is not a hard and fast rule in common law of confidentiality, in data protection, and all of these laws. It's a bit like we need to make a decision based on the best interest of the patient, resident, and making sure holistically we work together. I think that's it from me. I wanted to leave some time for questions, and obviously you will get the slides and then you can read up some of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tanya. And thank you for offering those reflections on how you might consider whether you want to offer that role in-house or whether you feel that you need to get some external support, please, and how you might go about doing that. So I've got a couple of questions that have occurred to me, and a couple that we've had in the Q&A. So I'll go to the Q&A in a minute. So something you said, Helen, about the seniority of the role, you said early on, and I think what we've heard about the challenges of the role, as well as actually how interesting it is, have sort of brought that to life a bit. But do you want to just say a little bit more about what you might want to think about when you're thinking about the seniority of the role?
Yeah, you need to think about conflicts of interest. If you're thinking about who can offer advice to senior management and who management will trust before they make a decision. So you're going to invest in a new software system, for example, that's thousands of pounds. And your finance director might be involved if you've got one, or general manager. There'll be clinical issues to be considered. Who will that group of people trust to give them good options with regards how they handle data as well? And who will be listened to? So that's one thing. And is it someone that is brave enough to say, well, actually, no, I don't think this is appropriate? That has that ability to say that in a way that will be heard and understood. And the assertive rather than the aggressive approach, and
brave. That's
familiar leadership.
Brave
stuff.
Fran, as well as being everything, you're also brave.
So as I say, conflict of interest. It's difficult for it to be somebody who's hands-on with financial budgets, for example, because what tends to happen is your senior risk person and senior managers will want repeatable processes that happen for 80% of your population. And your Caldicott Guardian might want to focus on the 20%. You're most vulnerable, for example. They will be looking at individual cases rather than the 80%. They'll look at the 80% as well, but they will always have that vulnerable element in mind too.
Thank you. And then perhaps following up on that for Fran and Tanya, Jenny asks, how many hours a week does the Caldicott Guardian role take up on average, or is it just how long's a piece of string? A case of as and when?
From my experience in like an acute trust, for example, I was actually maintaining the Caldicott Guardian log for the Caldicott Guardian. So I was helping and supporting. It depends on how many inquiries come in and how many projects you do. So if you have like 2 or 3 information requests and maybe 1 DPA a month, then it could be like 4 hours. If you have a big organization, you have a lot of changes and you might have to be part of a working group for a specific electronic health record deployment, and then you're in an area where it's a lot of integrated care system work, so you get a lot of information sharing protocols, it might be that you are really fully booked like a whole month. It really depends on how big you are and the type of variation you get.
Okay, yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please do. And Fran may want to chip in as well. Please do.
It really does depend on your organisation. At the beginning of your journey, having appointed a Caldicott Guardian, it will take more time than later on, because up front, if you put that investment in, I always describe it as putting Caldicott through your organisation, like the letters through a stick of Blackpool rock. Once you've got that foundation through, it's in, and you've checked all your policies. So currently, for example, you'll check all your policies for equality and diversity issues. If at the same time you review a policy, you review it for any confidentiality issues at the same time, you know it's built into that policy. And therefore, it's going to get an automatic review each time. So the workload decreases over time. But there's always more you can do. It's an improvement journey that continues throughout. There will always be something else that you can add, be it an audit of what's going on. Lots of different ways to add value. So yeah, it's entirely organisational based, I think.
Thank you.
I suppose just to add from my side of things, I think, from a social care perspective, reflecting kind of what Tanya was saying, it depends. When we were doing our ERP rollout of the system, it was massive. It was working parties, it was groups. On an average month, I have got somebody new that's starting posts. I'm kind of allocating 1 day a week, dedicated to kind of like information governance assurance and kind of those elements. But yeah, it will give and take.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So somebody has asked, if a provider wanted to document why they haven't got a Caldicott Guardian, what does this look like? What would be sufficient?
So it can be a decision made at a meeting and minuted at a meeting, for example, or it could be an email among your senior decision makers. If you have a look at the guidance that I put up online, it gives you all the different ways that you can document it.
Okay, so we've got that covered.
Yeah.
We can go
It's
and
in
look
there.
detail.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, you have got a lot of really great resources. I was just nosying on the website for the events. There's lots on there, isn't it? It's fantastic. Right, a great question from Helen. She says, has anyone got an example of a checklist that could be used when an information request comes in? for consideration by the Caldicott Guardian. I'm expecting you might have a resource there, Helen, but you know.
I would always work through the Caldicott principles, start at 1 and go through to 8.
Okay.
If you want to come along, I'm not pushing it, I get nothing for it, but if you want to come along to the problem solving example, I personally use a fishbone diagram, and I can show you how I use a fishbone diagram to start at the tail with the question that I'm asked and finish at the head with the advice that I'm going to give. And I have a systematic approach to going along my fishbone. DPIAs are also extremely useful in terms of decision making as well.
Is that one of your evening classes or a
Yes,
breakfast
yeah.
club? It's one of the
Evening class, that one.
Which one was it? I could put the link in the chat.
The problem solving one. I hint at it at the record keeping one because I also save my fishbone diagram as part of my record keeping. I take a photograph of it and retain it.
Helen, I remember that the UK Caldicott Guardian Council has like a record sheet where you can document your decisions.
You can document
your
decisions, but there is, and it's on the website, but it's not a checklist.
No, it's not a checklist, no.
And that's simply because every decision is different, and you will consider different things. You will go to a different group of people to talk to for advice. So you might go to the BMA or your insurer, for example. Are we still insured if we make this decision?
Yeah. That's a good one as well, because we had that with one of our GPs and they were asking us something about litigation. It's like, you need to involve your insurer because it's not just about data protection confidentiality. You might not be insured if you share this information for that. So yeah, definitely.
That is a really good point about your insurer. We did some work with Markel, who one of the big brokers. We were particularly looking at the experience around trying to get insurance during COVID and the kind of COVID legacy. But one of the things that they were talking about, as they're a specialist insurance provider, other providers are available. I'm not just pushing Markel, but one of the insights that we had from them was really making sure that your documentation, your decision making, and they didn't quite call it your defensive position, but being really clear about understanding why you have done something or why you haven't, and data confidentiality was up there along with being ready with your cybersecurity. So I think that's a really good shout, actually. Right, have we got any other questions? I've just got one more. I don't think, hang on, let me just have a look on the Q&A. Oh yeah, that's a good question from Helen. Should we set up a Caldicott Guardian network specifically for social care? Well, now, Katie, shall we? We could do one in the NCF, but don't know.
The UK Caldicott Guardian Council would support you if in that. We used to run some sector-specific ones, but since lockdown we haven't. We've just had the breakfast club, and everybody comes along to the breakfast club, and we get that cross-fertilization of different types, which is really useful to hear from different organizational types, and because a lot of the learning is transferable. But certainly, and the other thing, with it really growing in social care at the moment, the Caldicott Guardian Council are trying to grow their membership to reflect. So at the moment, we're probably underrepresented from the social care perspective. So if anybody is particularly enthusiastic, anybody can come along and observe a Caldicott Guardian Council meeting. They're fascinating. We get some really good speakers come and seek Caldicott Guardian advice. It's really interesting stuff, is the meetings.
We're going to take you up on your offer. I can see Katie's pop things and a reply in the chat. I really think that's a great idea, and your help would be fantastic. So we'll have a chat about how we might do that.
Super.
That is great. What a genius. Genius. You're a genius. Both Helens. Helen on the questions and Helen on the panel.
Liz, I just wanted to say, just going back to where the question was asked around checklists and that, and I know Helen mentioned it in her presentation around the training courses available on e-learning for health. Really recommend going through kind of all of them. I refreshed my mind coming into this session and went back and redid some of them recently. And sometimes, you know, they're nice. They're a nice e-learning compared to some of the e-learning and social care that you get. So yeah, I would recommend that. But I know that I think Katie's put the link in as well, hasn't she?
I don't know. Have you put the training link in? Katie will have a look.
In the
But e-learning
slides
for
anyway.
health, yeah, brilliant. Sarah asks, can DPOs join your breakfast clubs, Helen? Or is it just for Caldicott Guardians?
It's
Can anyone
really
come?
just it's for anybody that's in the Caldicott function. So if as a DPO you've also got the Caldicott Guardian role, then that's fine. But if you're a pure DPO, we're careful not to put an information governance view on everything. This is very much around Caldicott.
Okay. But you may be a DPO, who might be being considered for the Caldicott Guardian role, mightn't you? So
yeah,
kind of depends on your trajectory. Excellent. So we've got the link in the chat for the e-learning for health. We've got quite a lot of love on the chat actually for a social care specific network around Caldicott Guardianness. And you know what? I was thinking one of the things I was reflecting on, and I think I probably said to Katie is in the chat, I really think that in terms of regulation and how the CQC is thinking about how it might regulate, and it's come quite late to the party around enthusiasm for electronic care planning, digital social care records, hasn't it? But now it's embracing them. I do think that they will be asking those questions, particularly about some of the things that Fran mentioned about the balance of the data that you hold and why, you know, the rationale for what you've got in your system. Because obviously the more data you've got, the more risk that somebody might see it inappropriately, but also the more data you may be asked to share and the more complicated some of the questions your Caldicott Guardian might be being asked to think about. I think the regulatory world might take a little while to catch up with all of this, but I think it will then catch up with it, and I think it will become an area of increasing focus for the regulator.
Yeah, in the well-led inspections, it was certainly one of the part of the key lines of inquiry from the CQC, and we've had reports of Caldicott, medical directors in acute trusts having their door knocked upon. Can we talk to you about your role as Caldicott Guardian?
Yeah,
so yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, so Katie's going to do a little survey to participants to see what their appetite is for a little group. So we could think about that, Katie, about how we might manage that, resource that, whatever the word is, make it happen. That's what I mean. How do we make it happen?
We'll make it happen between us.
And I think I've lost Fran. I can't see Fran. Anyway, I kind of think we might be at. I haven't got any more questions. I've ticked off all my questions. Let me just see if there's any more pinged into the Q&A. No, I think we're good. Is there anything else that I said, Katie, that we should think about? When things occurred to me, I'm just scanning back now.
I think you've covered everything. We've been putting all of the links into the chat, but we will also send these out to everybody. If they're not included in the slides, you will get those separately. Yeah, I think there's just a couple more slides for you maybe to go through, Liz.
Oh, are there? Oh, sorry. Valeria, please may we move on with the slides? I was busy, excited. Question. Oh, yes. Oh, well, there's some money. Katie, you know about the money. I don't actually, I think some of the money might be quite hard to get, but you will tell people how to get it.
Yeah, that's right. So this is just a reminder for any care providers who are on the call who are currently using paper care plans and have been thinking about switching to digital care records. There is funding available through till the end of March. Please do get in touch with your ICS. If you follow the link in the slides, there'll be contact details for them and they will tell you about how you access the money. It's different for every ICS, so I'm not going to run through all 42 of them on the call. But that
if indeed you can remember.
Oh, I know. And
Yeah.
also in general, we do collate at Digital Care Hub any funding which is available for the sector, and I make sure that this goes into our newsletter every fortnight. So if you are interested in any funding you can access for digital topics, best thing I'd recommend is to sign up for our newsletter. It's literally just once a fortnight. We're not going to spam you, but any new funding that comes up, we pop in there.
Well, and it has other really useful things in it, doesn't it?
Oh yeah,
So
I think
definitely
we're
worth
helpful
it.
anyway, but thanks.
I think so. And then we've got one more slide, please, Valeria. Just list of resources. So these slides will come out and you will obviously have these in your inbox tomorrow. And then our final slide is a great big massive thank you. Thank you to our panel for all of their expertise and patience while we've been asking all our questions. Thank you to all of you who stayed with us. It might not have sounded that enticing, but didn't it turn out to be fascinating? So really spread the word. If you've got colleagues across your networks who you think might be wondering what a Caldicott Guardian role is and why it matters to them and why you can't live without one, whichever way you do it, do send them all the information and the recording will come out tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Valeria, for making it happen. Oh, hang on. I can see it. Hang on. Something's popped in. Thank you. Oh, so I thought it was a last minute killer question. Thanks, everybody. Really, really helpful. Thank you for your time. And we'll see you again. We'll see the panel again in Feb. Take care, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Oh, you've got some praise indeed from Andy. Probably the best hour and a bit I've spent on a webinar in the last couple of years. Take that. We'll take it before we get anything else. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
bye.